Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
So I'm going to say this, like, the podcast has started already. We're going to roll that back and go from there. But I'm here with Dan Ennis, who I've known now. This is a cool story. I think a lot of us, when the pandemic first came on, were just looking to talk to people, like-minded people, and we both were on the Gain, Grow, Retain leadership meetings. Or I don't even know if it was split up into leadership at that point in time. It was like, let's get together for an hour and a half and talk about CS, which was great. And it was like you and Sherry and all these other people that are great. And Dan was one of those guys who I was just like hit it off with. He always said the right things and everything. And then I found out kind of later that Dan was responsible for leading a team on the Scale team for Monday.com, which everybody loves. And now we point to the example every time we hear Scale. I'm like, you got to go look at Monday, talk to Dan, reach out to Dan and everything. So Dan, welcome. I want to first talk about, and we're going to get into some changes that we've seen over the last year and a half or so, but let's talk about how you came into the Scale movement, the Scale team. How many years had you been doing sort of regular CS and then this sort of kind of fell into your lap?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's really funny when I look back at kind of that customer success journey where a lot of these things, when I look back at moments in my career, it's where I'll notice that I was doing something before I knew there was a name for that thing. And then I wanted to jump into that. So my whole start with customer success in the first place was at a benefits administration company that had a software platform. So they were a service company, but I realized that our customers needed to enjoy using the platform if we wanted to have them be successful with using our service side, because their employees had to use it. So if they didn't like it, they weren't going to use it, and therefore they'd turn on the service side. But our company didn't view ourselves as SaaS because we weren't. We were just the software wasn't the thing we were selling. Yeah. So I focused on that, and I didn't know that customer success was a thing. And then I heard about this whole thing called customer success, and I remember thinking like, oh, so that's what I'm doing. Like, I want to do that formally now. And so that's what led me to go from kind of informally doing customer success to doing kind of very truly traditional CS, even though I'd been doing that. So I did kind of what we would call traditional CS for a good 6 or 7 years now. And then while doing that, though, towards the tail end of my time there, we began to work with certain significantly larger kind of national customers where we primarily only dealt with home office for a lot of the more strategic commercial conversations, but the moving the needle was done at their individual office location level who was using our product at the time. And so again, similarly, I didn't know that there was a name for this called Scale, but I remember thinking, okay, I can't meet with all these people like I can with my other customers, but I need them to be using it to be successful with this national person who I'm talking with, because they hear their office people and it all rolls up and the success there. So that was how I began cutting my teeth on Scale before knowing it was called that, just trying to figure out ways to asynchronously through our platform, through one-to-many emails, through strategic recorded videos, through fill in the blank, just ad hoc on my own. Like, this is what I have to do to make this account that on the surface is just one enterprise account. But in reality, more operated like that account was like a mini scale book of business, like in a lot of ways.
Just all the different areas, all the different offices, and you can get that in sometimes like when you've got a large company. I always say like Yummy Brands, and then you get KFC, and then you get this, and Taco Bell. It's just it's not just one account; it's a lot of different things that roll up into another.
Exactly. So that's when I began learning that and developing the practices of scale, and with others on my team, where I began to, because I was a team lead on that particular team, so really helping kind of others on the team develop those same types of strategies, because that account wasn't the only one, because it was in the insurance broker space, and that's how a lot of insurance brokers are set up at a national level. Yep. And so I was helping others on the team develop those strategies. And so then I eventually I left that role for another CS role. And then when I came to join Monday, they were building out their scale segment. And so for me, it was exciting to be a part of that for two reasons. One, I love being a part of building, and in all the CS teams I've been a part of, I've been a part of building the teams through those inflection points of maturity. Like, so helping build that team through that maturity point of specializing implementation, and then eventually account managers, and then things like that. Yep. And so the idea of being a part of building something was appealing, but it also blew my mind because it was like, oh, there's a name for that thing I was doing again. So that's what this is. And so that's how I got involved there. And because my formative experience out the gate was with technically enterprise contracts and using those scale skills that way, I already had in my brain from day one going into scale that this isn't just for the long tail of customers, because that wasn't how I learned about scale in the first place. Wasn't with low ARR. You're
just trying to make it happen, right? You were just it's trying to not work 60 hours a week.
Exactly. So that's what got me into scale and more formally. And again, just like with CS in itself, learning more about the formal disciplines and jumping into that. That was probably late 2020.
I love it. I love it. I've never been the theory guy, right? Like I had a classic interview at Microsoft back in like 2006 where they're asking me, the interview question, I'll never forget it, was tell me how you would project manage backing out of your driveway. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? What? Right? And so I'm like, well, I'd probably, I get one of those mirrors and put it up on the telephone pole so I can see cars coming in. And they were like, you answered that correctly, but you didn't know the theory terms on the project management stuff. And I'm like, by the way, at this point in time, like 7 years in, I'm like, I make shit happen, buddy. Like, I don't care what and then the hiring manager actually told me the same thing. They're like, don't worry about it. Like, we'd rather have a person who knows how to do it versus knowing what the theory term is for it. So like that.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is you take those things that you're doing naturally by elbow grease and you figured out by intuition, that you figured out through hard work and learning on the job. But then when you take theory and apply it to that, rather than the other way around, you take what was already good and you just launch it.
The theory is an accelerant at that point.
And that's how I look at it. And that's how it's historically for my career. That's what it's been. I'm doing something and then I realize, oh, there's a formal thing for this thing I've been doing. Yeah. Let me start to do that, which then launches what I was already doing just by nature of learning the formal practices.
My dirty secret is that I was always like that with playbooks. I'm like, I always heard about playbooks. I'm like, what is playbook? And then I actually saw one. I'm like, oh yeah, we do this stuff all the time. Absolutely, sequence of things, and list them out. I'm like, oh, got it. Okay, yeah.
And so that answers you. So going back, that's how I got into scale. That was late 2020. Joined as a senior individual contributor, kind of one of the founding members of that team.
Yep.
Within a year, I kind of moved to managing that team here in the US, which has been just an incredible journey. And it was right before, I always joke, it was a good year before like scale was like the in thing, right? Yeah. Because I feel like it was beginning of 2022 that I started to notice, even more so this year. I know we've talked about this before and it'll come up again later. Yeah. Even more so this year in light of the current economic times. But in the beginning of 2022, I feel like is when I started to notice a lot of other people talking about it. And so it's been really fun to kind of be learning from others, but also having been, from a practical perspective, we've just been ahead of the curve just by trying to do it and get out there before it was reacting to something. And so it's been a really fun journey.
Now, when you were like initially back in the day, just MacGyvering things and duct taping together and everything, like just give everybody like a little example of like you didn't have all those automated systems and everything, right? Like what were some of the things that you had? Because I remember as a developer, I used to have to do this, like writing a script to go fire an email off if this thing happened or something like that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So we didn't even get as much as some of that stuff tool wise. So it was even little things like for my team, because our tech stack was relatively limited at the company, at the role I was in at the time. So it was even things as little as, hey, save like these templates as your email signature. So you just pick a new signature in your Outlook, and you've got an email template that's there that you're then responding with. Like the little like hacky things to your point of
Oh, I
MacGyvering
like
of
that.
like,
That's a good one.
we just had to like, and so because we didn't have a system that gave us easy access to templates because of the just the tech stack we had
Yeah.
at the time, it was just look like, hey guys, just create this as a signature. The whole thing, like that signature is your template response.
I love it. I love
Things
it.
like that. Do schedule send a bunch of things out like with the schedule send feature in Outlook, because we were West Coast based and our customers were all across the country, but so therefore kind of skewed more towards Central and Eastern. Most of us had kind of the last couple hours of the day was the more heads down time. And so really always encouraging people, even things like, look, like just take that last 30 minutes of the day and get schedule send for early the next morning, like 150 emails. That's it.
Yep.
Like, and because you're using the signature, you're just changing emails. That's all you're doing. Let's do
Yeah.
this.
Oh my God.
Things like that, or doing freaking, Excel. I haven't had to do these in ages, like mail merges, basically.
Yeah.
With Excel to Word
I'm
docs to
shuddering.
personalize that, to personalize, because that's the tech stack we had. And I had to figure it out. I was like, you know what? I don't have access to like any fancy tools. So you know what? I'm going to create what looks like personalized collateral for my customers by just doing an Excel mail merge.
Wow.
And using that into a massive Word doc that print as a PDF and send that out in different ways. And it's like, those are the kind of things that I was having to work with to try to move the needle like asynchronously and one to many without this like formal discipline or all the tech stack backing that goes with it.
Were you able to see any type of like, was this working? Like, were you able to? I'm curious on that. Like, or was it like,
Absolutely.
oh my God, I hope somebody opens, because you might not even be tracking opens at this point in time or anything like that.
100%. So thankfully we had open tracking there, so that was good. That worked well. So the open tracking, just because I don't remember what add-on we used. It was something I'd never heard of and have never heard of since, but it worked. And hey, so you know what? Like I mean that, like, to that company's like credit, like good on them. If they found some scrappy tool that got the job done, like good on them for that. And I appreciated that. So it was less the open rates and more, if there's one thing that we did have that we punched above our weight on, it was the data we got. We didn't have access to BI tools like Looker or anything like that for us on the CSM side, but our teams had developed really robust usage reporting that tied directly to every feature in there to like a dollar value that they'd done like some really intense benchmarking.
Oh, interesting.
So it was super well researched, so that it was what I lacked in the modularity that I get maybe now with tools like Looker or any other more purpose-built BI tools, that I have a lot more modularity that I have control over, and it's a bit more technical. What I had with that was simplicity and ease of use. I pop something in, I pop the account.
You didn't have to learn complicated UIs or anything like that.
It spits out something and it looked good. It was by definition meant to be able to be shared right away with the customer. So with that, to that point, it was detailed enough that I knew which, we had to do enough research to know which offices, trended to which different components of the value there, because it would get that specific. It wouldn't just tell me the account level. It would tell me which offices under them were using it. So I can move the needle that way and tell from usage data there, which is what we wanted to do, because I didn't want to base it on open rates and click-through rates, because transparently, like vanity. From my perspective, that's exactly what I said. I was like, look, like if they're all opening everything and clicking on it, but there's no needle moving on the usage, like I don't care. Like that I'm not going to call that successful. Like,
wow, this is fascinating. I love it. And thanks for giving us that flashback into history, because I'm sure that's not how life is now. Well, just as a note, whether you don't have to name software, because everybody, it doesn't really matter. But what are the types of systems that you're using to? Let's do this. Let's talk about for somebody on your team, average number of accounts that they're managing over right now.
Yes, we've got kind of two subsets within my segment. One that is slightly more human intervention based accounts. So those are about 200 accounts for that cohort. And then about between 550 and 600 for the even less human intervention accounts, where that one is purely basing on all of the indicators and inputs that let us know when to insert just in time customer success with those. And so
there's never any. Let's dive into this for a quick second, because this always pops up. Yeah, I always call it's like a light touch, almost no touch, but there is like a, oh my God, press the oh shit button. Like we've seen some trends going down. They're not, I'm sure you've got some sequences that are firing off even at that point in time, but there's a certain thing where they're like, okay, we have a three touch sequence. They didn't open up any of these. We need somebody to jump in on.
And that's exactly right.
Worth putting a body on it at that point in time?
Absolutely. And that's what we've seen is that's like the beauty of it is so few of those at a time require the human intervention that one person can have their name attached to that many accounts. And on the surface, it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's so many. That's how does one person do that? Because they don't have to talk to all those accounts. They're not doing that. The vast majority of it is asynchronous, one-to-many stuff that they're doing, developing content, leading office hours, all these things that don't involve the one-to-one. But they absolutely have the ability to, and so few accounts, like percentage-wise, it still ends up being enough to fill someone's time. Absolutely, they are very busy. But I mean, but percentage-wise, it's so small that it actually require that intervention. Then at that point, because the other stuff is doing what it's supposed to for that segment.
Well, let's dive into this deeper. This stuff fascinates me, and I'm sure people, if they're still listening, then it fascinates them as well too. I get asked all these questions a lot, so. When it is time for that person to jump in on that account, did they get a trigger in your CSP, or did somebody in data ops, CS ops come over and say, here's 5 customers you need to reach out to? I've seen both models work. I'm just curious sort of what you've got going on.
Yeah. So right now we do not currently use a CSP at this point in time. Exploring it, we've got definitely, something that we likely at some point will have. We've been able to use a combo of Salesforce or CRM, Monday, and because we just don't lean into our own tool, and our BI tools that we haven't needed to develop the separate yet or lean into that. So I share that to say, so it's not being like a trigger through that. What we have is, but it's also not just data ops like proactively telling them. So what we've done is our data biz ops team has developed really great models based on, and they've iterated it, and so where we've landed at now, that's been really helpfully predictive. Is not where we started. So know that this is the end state after a lot of iteration. But we arrived at a report that does a really good job at giving a risk score on like a 1 to 5 for a 0 to 5, because accounts go 0, of course.
Because developers are involved.
And these accounts, like for these thresholds to make sense, like a 0. So it's like 5, because it's 5 different categories that could flag yes or no on is what it is. And so that's why it's 0 to 5, because they could have nothing in any of those categories. And so it updates monthly because we understand that these things take time to move the needle, and we don't want people just constantly like looking at it every single week. So their workflow is they'll go in at the beginning of the month, because at the beginning of every month they'll see the accounts. This is what I want to focus on trying to get a hold of this month for those accounts. So that way it's a nice balance of, well, it's not quite as helpful as the, hey, here's this right away, just in time, like exactly. But I've also, having operated in that model, it's also nice because they're not constantly having to jump at a new thing that's coming up. So it gives them a really like controlled workflow of, I'm going to go in at the beginning of the month, identify the accounts, and do everything I need to do from their research, try to get a hold of, fill in the blank. And on those same, the other time that there can be human intervention is we have a mechanism for our sales team, our account management team, to request someone get on an account. And it's either could be because, hey, we understand that data does a good job at telling most of the story of risk. But if AMs are talking with an account that they're trying to expand, and they hear them saying that they're actually talking to a competitor, and we would have no way to know that with the data, that's a great thing that they can flag, say, hey, someone needs to get on this. And great, that's human validation. Or we've got an expansion op, but man, they're just a little frustrated with this one use case. Their data looks good, but if they get over this hump, they're not at risk, but if they get over this hump, we're really sure we can close an expansion. So we've got a great mechanisms to bring in the human element that we know data doesn't catch everything, but it catches most of it. So they can request it from the human side on the account management team, or on the other side of it, they can, our team finds it the once a month.
So it sounds like to me, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it's kind of like they're on a monthly basis reviewing trends and trying to push the trend in the right direction.
That's a great way to describe it, I would say. So they're looking, and it gives because this report, what I love about it is It gives them three things. One, it gives them the 0 through 5, where they're at a risk level on those categories. We've identified if they're over a certain threshold of that, the overall account is at risk. So the CSM has access to all the data, whether it's just what level of risk they currently are, and we've identified if they're over X threshold of risk, they are at risk. The account is considered, the account is at risk, not just this area is. And then it also provides, of the last 6 months, how many months was this account at risk? Because we want to give them that. So we know we don't want just a point in time. So we want to give them everything they need to prioritize. Hey, this account is technically at risk, but just barely, and they haven't been at risk at all before. So I'm going to focus on these other accounts that are higher level of risk and have been at risk for 4 months, right? And so those kinds of things. So
that's fascinating. Where I always get caught up and inside my own head on some of this is the high touch model of sales sold the deal, and you need these 3 outcomes from your software, right? And then you as a CSM is always making sure that they're driving on those 3 outcomes and they're seeing the value, and you're like, hey, look at your usage and look at this and look at that. How are you systematically doing that without having that, high touch and the EBR, QBR and things like that?
Yeah, so I would say on that kind of, with the 2 segments, we approach it differently with the 2 subsegments. So on that lowest touch segment, if I'm transparent, we haven't yet cracked the code on how to tie directly to those outcomes. Well,
thanks for being honest about that. I appreciate it.
Like, I know I'd rather not on, we
nailed it. Yeah,
exactly. And then let me talk at such a high level that it's clear to anybody who knows what they're talking about. Like, he didn't say anything right there. So I'm going to be honest on that part of it, right? Like but on our slate,
I'm looking at you, David Epperly. I don't know if you know David. You guys should meet, but he's like a CS ops ninja guy. Yeah, I know he listens. So
that's so funny. That's what I'm saying. It's like look, on that one we haven't cracked the code on that yet. We've got some that we can tie to outcomes, but we also know just with the nature of how Monday is used, like it's a little harder to track that one asynchronously without getting at least some level of human validation on what they're looking to get. And we've got some access to what that is, because if they have gone through our onboarding, because depending on, there's any number of factors where an account can be a smaller one, but have paid to have the higher level of onboarding. There's any number of things that could go into it. Long story short, we try to validate that a little bit where we can, but also when the CSM reaches out, that's where they go first, though, is what the person's trying to accomplish. When the CSM works with them, so then we can have it just notated in our CRM. We've got the human validation on this is what they're working on now. And we can track towards that in the future. And B, that's what they focus their time on, not just on metrics in general. Like they try to focus their time towards that. So it does have the human validation component still, but it's not the overtime high touch way. But it is done like, look, we acknowledge I can't just look at their data and say, great, they're accomplishing the exact outcome they set to accomplish in this case, just without talking to them, have cracked that code. Or CSM doesn't just reach out and say, hey, like, we want to get your usage up, like, because that doesn't mean anything to a customer. Like, and so we know better than to position it that way. We go for, hey, what did you want to accomplish with Monday? What are you trying to get done?
Right.
How are you feeling you're trying to accomplish that? And like, how can we help you better do that? I'm oversimplifying. They do a way better job at the positioning, but that's at a high level what it is. Like, how do we make sure that you're being successful with what you wanted to accomplish with Monday in a time-bound way, not reaching out as I'm your CSM, but hey, I'm reaching out as a resource from the customer success team, because they're reaching out to them because we don't want to.
And if you instrumented that into the tech touch process, where that would be like a, choose from one of these 4 options of the things that you're trying to do. We're getting into surveying a little bit, which I just wanted to touch a little bit, but not too much on, but yeah.
So not yet. We're exploring that because we're trying to think of how we could capture that. And that's one of the things that we're exploring when it comes time to potentially do a CSP, is that kind of thing, to get that a little better, because right now we wouldn't have an easy way of doing something with that if we did it now, right? So that's why we haven't yet, because it's one of the reasons I love my boss, with big shout out to her on this call, Kim Landau, is when I come with these ideas, I'm like, oh, there's something we should do, and I've got these great ideas, because she kind of leads globally leads the team, and so I'm managing the team here in the US. She is so good about finding the times to say either like, yes, that's great, like, here, like, I'm empowering you, go for it. But she's also really good at stopping with the question of, okay, so but what would we do with that? Like, walk me through, so I can know, because hey, that sounds nice in a vacuum, but everything has opportunity cost. So if we did that, what would we do with it? Because it does have the cost of time of
How do you
setting
make this
up and doing those
actionable,
things.
right? Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I can't thank her enough because I get excited. Like I'm like, oh, let's try. This sounds exciting. So to your point, like something like that is something we've talked about. And her response has been, hey, that sounds fantastic, but what would we do with it? Like, how would we use that, operationalize that right now? And you know what? You're right. We don't have a way yet. So keep that in our back pocket for when we do. And we keep
Yep.
that as one of the criteria that when we're evaluating what we're going to do for a CSP down the
Got
line
it.
and things like that. So,
And to tag on to that, I'm just curious, it's popped up a lot in the last few weeks, but any type of NPS CSAT surveying? Well, it's tough to say. CSAT survey. Yeah. Tough
yeah,
thing to
so
say,
we
Rob.
do, yeah. So we do kind of we do both. So we
Okay.
want to be able to understand. So CSAT perspective, for the accounts that have that slightly higher touch with our CSM after
Mhm.
those strategic touch points that they have that are a bit more scheduled,
Yeah.
they get like a CSAT to say, hey, how helpful is the CSM been? So we want to understand that because we want to understand where the customer's perception is of the service, because we want to make sure we're tweaking it to consistently. We want it to be helpful for the customers. And so we want to make sure that the service level is fine tuned to what they need. And it's at a different cadence. We've got a whole different kind of logic baked into it for those that are at that even lower touch. But the idea is our CSAT on the customer success side is meant to say, hey, we know we want to measure the impact from a business perspective, but we also want to be cognizant of the customer perception of the impact from the customer success team. And then we do also have NPS that we're aware of. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily super action on that yet because like everybody's talking
Yeah.
about right now.
Well,
It's a
did you see Greg Danes from Churn RX?
I was gonna say, yeah, there is the
Amazing.
direct correlation on that, and I think it ties to, and Jan Young's someone else who I'll give a good shout out
Oh
to
yeah,
as well.
Jan's
Her
awesome.
and I
Yeah.
always talk about it. The idea, with NPS having been built as a B2C metric, which is
Absolutely. I mean, I was
super
B2C
predictive.
back in the day, so it was crucial. Like it was like this good housekeeping seal of approval that you needed to have. So,
And it was vital for B2C
oh,
because it's asking a very B2C question. And so in a B2B environment, it's a helpful data point to have and be aware of, especially when we're like talking to people so we can understand their perception of the product going into a conversation with them or their team's general perception. So it's something that we action in that way more than like it triggers a big thing because we
oh
know
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't necessarily. So but we do have that. We're aware of it. The CSAT one we just are more aware of so we can see where customer perception is. And then of course there's always the support related.
Yeah, let me just tie the knot for people who haven't seen it. I'll put a link to it in the podcast notes. But Greg Danes, Churn basically said that whether people say yes or no is not the indicator of churn or renewal. It's whether they actually responded to the survey. Whether it shows that they're actually engaged or not. It was a leading indicator, I should say. So yeah.
And that's very similar to the logic around number of support tickets.
Oh,
Where
exactly. Everybody thinks
customers
if you have high support,
where
oh no, everything's blowing up. It's like, no, you have a ton of people using it. So
that means that they're very engaged. Exactly. The customers that do occasionally, sure. If it's one persistent, massive bug that they've never been able to solve, that's been a showstopper, sure.
yeah,
That's a leading indicator of risk. But in
yeah.
general, high support usage actually correlates to engaged customers because
Yeah.
they care. They're trying
Because
to use
like, what is the worst thing if you're like, I always tie things back to relationships with people. What's the worst thing if they just ignore you, right? So love and hate are the same emotions on different scales, but ignorance is just like they want nothing to do with you. So they're trying to use your product and they're like, screw it. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to them if it gets fixed or not. So awesome. So Dan, let's take a quick. I think we did a really good job on and there's some other stuff I can point to on the. Sorry, looking at my notes here. On the scale stuff. But when we were chatting, there was another topic that I think we can relate back to these teams, which is making rock stars out of your team. You now run a large team and you have a big focus on making sure that these people, regardless if they're managers or not, sort of move to the next level. And you definitely you use the term, I want to make rock stars out of my people. So I wanted to get into what are some of the things that you're doing with your people that maybe not other people are doing to get your team to the next level?
Yeah. So I would say there's a few different things there that are really helpful, I would say. First is it cannot be stated enough, like having those open conversations around what someone's goals are. I think that assumptions in the manager, team member relationship go a really long way at damaging that, whether it's from the team member assuming that the manager knows what their goals are, or a manager assuming those same goals. Having those open conversations is incredibly impactful, because it enables me as a manager to be able to then point them in the right direction, to be able to point them to development opportunities that tie to their long-term goals. So the first part is having open, transparent conversations, and not just the, hey, what do you want to be doing in like 5 years? Right. Not that kind of vague question, but we try to break it down into, hey, what is it that you want to do as your next step? And it's funny because my team can vouch for this. Anytime anybody has ever said, management, the first question I ask is, walk me through why. Because I want to make sure that it's not just that's the only development path that I think of, and I don't want to plateau in my career. So I'm going to say that because I'm already a senior individual contributor. So I guess manager is what I want to do. Because we all know, like, and you and I have joked about that. That's the quickest way to set somebody up for not success.
Oh, it's the worst.
That's the main reason.
I remember back in the developer days, and I think it's really prevalent in developers, where it's sort of like, you're the best developer. So now here's 5 people to report to you. And my thing, and I don't see this as much in CS, but I used to always say, does anybody remember when Michael Jordan was a coach? It was a disaster. Yes. And because he's like, I don't know why you guys just can't. And then I'll go dunk on everybody. Like, why can't you just go do that? Right. And then, it's that whole, what so much of, there's a term for this, which I forget. It's got like the word fallacy or something in it, but like, here's our theory lacking here. But like, a concept so well, but you can't explain it to people. And you just assume that everybody naturally knows that thing because it was so easy for you, or they just really worked really hard on it. So yeah,
exactly. So and there have been times when the answer has been because of all the right reasons, and so I want to help them develop towards the management. But it is just to do that first initial, making sure that, like, because I want to help them understand that there's other horizons as well for ways to develop in. So first off is that. Secondly, from my end, it's really being creative with what someone is enabled to do in their role. So starting with, look, like, here's the table stakes, KPIs, the things you need to be doing for this role, because you are this role. That is your job right now.
Yep.
But beyond that, like, look, here's different things you can do to add value that within reason. And I always preface it with, look, like, I never want you to feel like you're taking advantage of by a company by doing more. I was like, so any of this you don't want to do, like, leave it on the table. But if you're looking to grow into this area, here are things that you could do that are like peripheral to your day-to-day, that are things that would enable you to do that. So things like, I have someone who wanted to grow in programs. And so like the program side, so I've allowed them to own really developing, centralizing like a lot of the program stuff that we do. So it's not technically its own position, but working with this individual to develop those things and freeing her to say, hey, what do you need? And having those conversations, say, hey, this is what you want to develop in, and this is the table stakes that you have to get done. What do you need to be able to do those two things, if that's what you're wanting to do?
Yep.
And being able to have those open conversations with people, I think, really empowers them when they hear, there's creative ways to think about my role, and that my manager really is trying to say, I want to back you in this. How can I help with that? And then beyond that, I joke that, like, being a part of the broader customer success community and networking that I'm in is a big benefit, because I love being able to point my team outside this, because I'm not the only person who can develop people in certain ways.
Right.
Immediately in their role isn't the only way to develop in certain ways. And so I love being able to point people, like, even outside, to say, hey, I've talked to so-and-so. Love to make a connection if you're open to that, because they do XYZ that you're trying to do.
Absolutely.
And can point you in the direction that they've developed in. So those are a couple of the things, but really it also boils down to, I am like very type A organized. And so we really like track surprise, track religiously what is it that you're wanting to like accomplish as your goals, and then how are we making sure that the things you're doing that are extracurricular, so to speak, are mapping to those? Because I don't want you to be busy for the sake of being busy.
Absolutely.
So if we can't map these things that you're wanting to do, these extracurriculars, back to those goals, I'm probably going to recommend, hey, unless there's a really big business need to do it, probably wouldn't recommend that, because it doesn't go with the story you're trying to tell of your development here. Because I really love helping people do that, and then lastly has been really just helping people think through what I've had to do in my own career plenty of times, which is the mindset shift of coaching through to the idea of like your career's a marathon, not a sprint. And so
Absolutely.
the development things you do right now might not immediately mean a new title change, a new this, and especially when we're in 2023 where everybody's like with that kind of thing. But it's more to point to those areas and say, doing this is still an investment in you. As long as you're not feeling taken advantage of, which you are the barometer for that. And I will trust your gut on that. It was what I always try to give them, that carte blanche. Like, you're the one who gets to own that, and I will never push beyond that. But as much as you're willing to, these things are an investment in you in the long term.
They are compounding events that can happen.
Exactly.
And I will say, I use this in a different podcast, but as a veteran of the three wars, and this is an investment term, like some of the old school investors, the 2001 like .com bubble, the 2008, and now the current situation, calling those the three wars these days. And in all three of well, not this current one, but like in the past two, it was one of those things where it was like, look, to me, conversations with me from my manager were like, no raise, maybe not even a title change, but if you can just do this, I can guarantee when the time is right, it'll pay off. So if you have a good, open, and trusting relationship with your manager, absolutely. And maybe I muled some Cuban cigars back from England one time, which helped out too, but whatever,
That's a story for another day. I love it.
We'll talk about that one in San Francisco. Well, listen, Dan, the thing that's come through the most of everything, it's amazing that you had said type A, so you don't mind me saying it, but you never seem burnt out by this stuff. Whenever we talk, you're just super excited. Because I know some people who do a lot of what you do and are type A, and they're just like, I've aged 10 years in the last 2 and things like that. But you just have this passion for it, and it comes through. And I know we can go on for like another hour and talk about this stuff, but we're going to be gracious with your time. So this was an amazing on both of the sort of large subjects that we covered here. So I'm going to turn it over to something that's a little lighter. Remove work, because we always just talk about work and everything. What is something that you want to look back at the end of this year and say you got done that is non-work related?
Oh man,
this is a surprise question. I did not.
I love it. No. I love this. I love this. I'm gonna give. There are two. I'm gonna give. It's gonna be 2 or 3 quick. First 2 are quick hits. The third one's a little longer. The two quick hits are one.
Classic ADD. Like here's 3 bullet points. Here we're gonna go 1, 2.
Not even that, but it is what it is. Yeah, exactly. So one, I want to follow through on something I did last year, which was like my reading goal, which was it was 2 a month was the goal, and I started super strong, and I was like 3 a month for the first like 3 months in the year.
Like end to end, cover to cover, because that's tough. Because a lot of business books, it's like the Gladwell books have always been like, here's a concept. Do you understand the concept? Great. Here's 15 more chapters on the same concept. You're
and that's why exactly. So that's exactly, actually, funny enough, that's part of how my strategy this year. It's funny you mentioned that exact thing. So the same goal, so 24 for the year, right? So I'm saying 2 a month, but really it's 24 for the year. But one of the things that's allowed me to be more successful at that so far this year is I don't even remember the book it was, but there was something in January that I picked up that was exactly like that by the 3rd chapter, I realized I got all that I am going to get out of this book.
Yeah.
So rather than either feel like I was cheating by counting it or slowing down my reading by forcing myself to read through this thing that felt like a slog. It was a great book. The book was not a slog, but it felt like a slog because I get the thing already. Yeah. I just was willing to say, great, I got all I'm getting out of this book. Next book, and I tore through that next one.
Yeah.
And so because it was new. And so sure, I didn't count that book, but I've given myself permission to say I've gotten enough out of this book.
I'm the same way. And I think the Gladwell book was the one on the 10,000 hours thing. Here's hockey players playing 10,000 hours. And then then there's this pilot 10,000. I'm like, okay, now I'm not that smart, but my dimly lit light bulb is going off saying, if you do a lot of something, you're going to pick up some expertise on it. As a note on that, literally last weekend, I found this app, or it was recommended to me, where I think it's called Headway, where you go through all these question and answers things, and it serves up the best content from these books or whatever. So I got like 2 chapters from Atomic Habits, another chapter from this other book, and it will also play the audio for me when I'm walking my dogs and everything. So I love that. So that's number 1.
That's amazing. The books. Yep. Second one, similar category but slightly more fun. So by the end of last year, I had built out my list of like a backlog of movies that I had just never seen, either ones that were recent releases that I missed, or just the list of shame movies that are like, how did I never see this movie? That are just have always.
It's always great to have one that you hold on to that you love to shock people with. Like for me, it's Titanic. I've never seen it, and how you can? I'm like, never seen it. I'm not going to go see it.
Yep, I feel that for sure. And so so make my way through the movie backlog, because I'm someone who enjoys movies a lot, and if I'm gonna like just diddle on my phone for like an hour and a half, I'd much rather have watched a movie. Like it'd just be much more enjoyable. I get way more out of that, way more fulfilling. But then the third is really looking for, by the end of the year, I'll be really stoked if we can have found a new volunteer opportunity for our family to connect in, because my wife was on the board of this incredible, really local, like volunteer group where she was on the board, women led. Like we loved it because the whole family could be a part of helping with it. That really served like the minority, immigrant, marginalized community, like in our community, and we loved being a part of it, whether it's through tutoring, things for vulnerable new moms, like a lot of incredible stuff. It really wound down during the pandemic because of like they were all like, it was a high in person, like that was their whole everything, was what they did, was these in-person things. So naturally wound down a bit during the pandemic, and made the like difficult decision to say, look, like it's not going to ramp back up the same way. So we're probably just going to put this one on pause. And so I think it was absolutely the right call for that org at that time. Especially because the lady who actually led it just took it to the next level and got involved in her local city government, is now on their campus.
Oh, that's great.
Because that's just her personality. And I'm not surprised at all. And she's a rock star at that, and a role model. But that part aside, it left us going into this year, like my wife and I talk, okay, we want to find another one, because for us, it's a huge value that our girls grow up knowing, like, A, that they can make a difference, because that's super empowering for them. But B, that like our responsibility isn't just to our own family and to ourselves. Like that's super crucial to us and like a really core value for us. And so we loved about that other org was that it was something that the kids could come to, they could be a part of, like helping in what little ways. And so for us, that's our challenge this year, is we could easily find something that my wife or I could do. Like that would be no brainer. To
bring the kids into the mix
brilliant. Too. Yeah, exactly. Like that would be easy, like quote unquote, to find that opportunity. But we really want something that we can bring them into. So that's our goal this year.
I love it. Oh my God. And now I'm going through some shame because we don't do anything like that. But
it's never in any shame kind of way, man. Like, look,
I'm just kidding.
Man, you're that way, dude. It's just and
it's amazing. And I think everybody listening is just probably like, oh my God, Dan is a great guy. So thank you so much. We're like pushing the button. I know we BS'd for a little bit up front. So I'm going to hit stop in 1 second. We'll make sure we'll get all your contact stuff and drop it into the post and everything like that. Dan, I'll see you in May and at Pulse at the. I'll tell more details on that in the beginning. But
I was about to say.
Yeah, well, that's fine. So if anybody has gotten to this point, if they're going to Pulse in May, I will be there as well, playing in a cover band, doing some hits with some other CS leaders, which should be really fun. So more details on that soon.